Well, joining me now is Deborah Brosnan, a climate specialist with over 25 years of experience in environmental risk reduction and problem solving across government, civil, and private sectors in the U.S. Deborah, such an honor to have you on the show this afternoon. Just how extreme is the warning in this report?
Oh, this by any standard is a dire report. It is not the news we were hoping for, but yet it's not surprising. We now have 30 years of data. Scientists have been studying climate change intensively with these climate reports for 30 years. And this is an unequivocal statement that basically humans have now altered the planet so much that we are threatening our own lives, our livelihoods. It is very bad news for the planet, and we are out of time, and we need to do something drastically quick.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's just paint the picture, Deborah, here as to the warmer weather that we should anticipate, the melting in the Arctic. What's the current state of play here when it comes to the climate around the globe?
So when it comes to the climate around the globe, what we're seeing as a direct result of human impact on the planet is that we are seeing an increased number of droughts. We're seeing it in California, we're seeing it in the Mediterranean, increased drought, hotter temperatures. And when you put those two together, you increase the risk of wildfires. Now, anybody watching TV can see immediately the consequences, because we're seeing it in the Dixie Fire in California, those horrific images, and a lot of suffering of communities and families. We're seeing it in Greece, in Evia, where people are evacuating. They have some of the highest temperatures ever. And this is now becoming the new norm, where this is not breaking news anymore. This is everyday news. So for our planet, we're really living climate change at the moment. Added to that, what we can expect going forward in the future is that some things are already locked in. The changes have been so intense that it will take hundreds, millennia of years to reverse them. One of those is sea level rise. So for communities living on the coast, sea level rise is going to happen. Even if tomorrow we could reverse the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it is already happening. That change is going to continue. That being said, we have to take action. Every little bit will count now. Mm-hmm. We are, as the UN Secretary General said, on code red. It is red alert for planet Earth.
So, Deborah, let me ask this, right? Some things are inevitable at this point. They're out of our control. But some things still are in our control, right? Just how hot it gets, for instance, is still in our control. What are the steps that are imperative that humans take to make sure that this is still a livable planet?
The first and most important step is to start reducing greenhouse gas emissions urgently. And that is done through the use of renewable technologies. We are now quite advanced in everything from solar energy to wind energy. So we can rapidly make a shift to renewable energies if we put our mind to it. That's number one. And the second is really getting countries to think about how they're going to reduce emissions and how they're going to combat carbon dioxide already in the atmosphere, whether that is through technology or whether it is through planting trees and taking nature-based actions to do it. If we all get on board and we all start to do these types of changes from a technology and a human perspective, we can actually start to slow down the rate of change, and we can start to pull back from the brink.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk specifically about government. Deborah, what are the conversations that need to be had, and are there countries that are leading this effort that could pioneer and usher other countries into some solutions for the dire state of the climate?
Well, I think the U.S. is in an interesting position right now, because the U.S. has really reemerged as a leader in climate change and in wishing to tackle climate change. So there's two things that can be done, particularly from the U.S. in a leadership role. One is the Biden infrastructure plan is about to come up for vote and to be implemented. A lot of the climate efforts in that have been watered down, and what the US could do right now is to increase and to really strengthen and monitor the amount of climate resilience efforts that are in that bill, whether it is, again, in renewable technologies, whether it is using more sustainable materials, building in nature to infrastructure responses. These are all possible. The other is governments need to find ways to hold each other accountable, because for the last 30 years we've heard a lot of pledges. We go to UN meetings, we go to intergovernmental meetings, and every country steps up and talks about the importance of climate change and what they hope to do to combat it. And yet here we are, 2021, literally on the brink of disaster. So there are a lot of pledges, but not a lot of accountability. So governments need to hold each other accountable, and they also need to hold the private sector and their citizens accountable. And so more scrutiny on climate change. I think we have to have a more serious discussion on a carbon tax, and we have to have more serious discussion on how we reward companies that tackle climate change and how we hold companies that don't accountable.
Let me ask you this, Deborah, you're right. It's no longer breaking news. There's a climate crisis and unbearable weather, destructive weather on a daily basis in nearly every part of this country. We've seen it play out just over the past year. So talk to me, based on this report today, to put it in perspective, how many weather-related climate crisis events are we seeing today versus what we saw a decade or 2 decades ago?
Oh, a decade or 2 decades ago, it was unusual. If a wild, I mean, there have always been wildfires in the West, always wildfires in Europe, but it was really unusual for them to reach a level where they were so huge, so large, and so many people were affected. So it is not just that we have an increased number of them today compared to a decade ago. It is that the intensity of these fires and the intensity of the flooding is much greater than it was a decade ago. More people are being affected today than they were a decade ago. What a decade ago was the 1 in 500 year flood is now the 1 in 100 year flood. So the chance of a community receiving a flood is much, much higher.
All right. Deborah, thank you so much for joining with your insight and expertise. That's Deborah Brosnan, president of Deborah Brosnan and Associates.